Belarus has always been a key ally of Russia, both economically and politically. The Kremlin uses the territory of Belarus as a springboard to launch attacks on Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. As Moscow swallows Minsk up, Belarusian media are increasingly echoing the Russian propaganda war. A few weeks after February the 24th, Putin and Lukashenko held negotiations. During this meeting, the self-proclaimed president of Belarus said that Ukraine was preparing an attack on Russia and Belarus.
And I will now show the location which they plan to use as a base to attack Belarus. If they had not been a preventive strike on the positions, 4 positions, 6 hours before the operation, I will show you the map that I brought with me. They would have attacked the troops of Belarus and Russia, which were conducting exercises. So we did not unleash this war. Our conscience is clear. It's good that we started. Biological weapons, the largest nuclear power plants, and all this was ready to blow up.
As the full-scale war in Ukraine raged on, Belarusian media started to actively work on the demonization and dehumanization of Ukrainians. So-called journalists accused the West of bloodthirstiness, talking about the supply of weapons to Ukraine as a possible obstacle to the establishment of peace, just like their Russian counterparts. Moreover, Belarusian propaganda often resorts to quoting representatives of the Russian government or involving Russian propagandists to distribute certain messages.
Lukashenko, Ukraine was going to attack Belarus. Ukraine prepares to capture regional center of Belarus. Head of Belarusian KGB accuses Ukraine and Western countries of preparing terrorist attacks in Belarus.
Ukraine wants to attack Belarus. Belarusian and Russian propaganda actually speak in unison. However, while repeating messages of Kremlin propaganda, Minsk has formed one key message above all to explain its partnering with Russia. Lukashenko keeps repeating that Kiev has plans of seizing Belarus. These narratives became more frequent as the tension related to the strengthening of the threat from Belarus intensified. On January the 24th, Alexander Lukashenko, the self-proclaimed president of Belarus, said that the West has not given up on its plans for Belarus, although Ukrainians are allegedly offering a non-aggression pact.
We have to unite now to survive so that, God forbid, rockets don't fly here and bombs are not dropped on us. And you are right, the West is already rubbing hands. In Ukraine, they continue to train those militants and extremists. I don't understand why Ukrainians do this. On the one hand, they ask us not to start the war against Ukraine in any case so that our troops do not move there. A non-aggression pact is suggested for signing. And on the other hand, they are preparing this explosive mixture and arming them.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Ukraine has never had any intention of attacking Belarus in response to the claims of Alexander Lukashenko. In December, Russian President Vladimir Putin visited Minsk for the first time in 3 years, and at the end of the month, the so-called joint Russian-Belarusian air tactical exercises began on the territory of Belarus. Meanwhile, Russia keeps launching missiles at Ukrainian cities and towns from the territory of Belarus. Russian propaganda is being active in creating fakes, as usual. The Kremlin propagandist machine keeps spreading both old and new lies, adapted to the current situation. This week, Russian so-called journalists and officials have been reacting to the decision-making considering the supply of Leopard tanks to Ukraine.
German tanks to start fighting for Ukraine. What will happen now? Putin spokesman Peskov threatens Germany over Ukraine. Leopards will not help. Why Germans are in no hurry to send their tanks to Ukraine?
Leopard tanks will not help Ukraine on the battlefield. Russia uses this message to explain to its population why Germany would help Ukraine with modern tanks. Such statements are another way for the Kremlin to raise the moral and fighting spirit of Russian citizens, showing their steadfastness of decisions and confidence in the result.
Relations between Germany and Russia are already at a fairly low point. There is no substantive dialogue with Germany and other EU and NATO countries. But of course, such supplies do not promise anything good for future relations. They will leave an inevitable trace for the future of these relations.
Peskov also added that the West is wrong in its hopes that Ukraine can succeed on the battlefield. The self-confidence of the Russian leadership in front of the cameras is another psychological operation aimed at both Western countries and the internal population of Russia. For Western countries, such messages are a manipulative call not to support Ukraine and not to intervene in the war. Russia also continues to threaten the world with nuclear weapons. The possibility of the use of nuclear weapons exists in any battle with a nuclear state like Russia, and President Vladimir Putin is aggressively capitalizing on these worries. By doing this, Moscow hopes to scare Western citizens in addition to discouraging Western governments from giving Ukraine more meaningful support. However, at the same time, Russia wants to save the face, so from time to time it accuses Ukraine, which gave up nuclear weapons almost 30 years ago, of possessing a nuclear threat to the world.
Kyiv hides Western weapons and nuclear power plants.
Ukraine threatens world with nuclear weapons. Russian state-owned media RIA Novosti has published the news stating that the Ukrainian armed forces are wrapping up the weapons and ammunition provided by the West in the territories of nuclear power plants.
The Ukrainian army is wrapping up the weapons in the territories of nuclear power plants in the calculation that the Russian military will not strike these arsenals.
By publishing such disinformation, Russia can prepare the groundwork for concealing future crimes against our state and aggravating panic among Ukrainians, the Center for Countering Disinformation explained. Russia always says that it is fighting the whole NATO and not just Ukraine. This way, Kremlin propagandists explain to its population and the world why the so-called Second Army cannot get the victory against Ukraine. In addition to this narrative, Russian so-called journalists are often humiliating the personality of Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine.
Zelensky is reanimated with help of electric shock due to the constant use of drugs, his life hangs in a balance. Drug addict Zelensky is supported by doctors so that he doesn't die. Using cocaine, media found out where Zelensky and his subordinates get drugs.
Zelensky is drug addict. Among other things, Russians repeatedly faked photos and videos trying to expose Zelensky as a drug addict. This is one of the main narratives promoted by Russians. In addition, during the massive attacks, propagandists tried to convince everyone that Zelensky had fled Kyiv and was hiding somewhere in a bunker. However, none of this is true. Following this narrative, Russian media Bloknot.ru has published the news with the such headline.
This is Zelensky. Huge nose with white pads appeared on streets of Milan. With someone's slight hand, mayor's creative work was called a monument to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
The installation in the form of a nose with a cocaine track on one of Milan's squares has no relation to the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. The author of the sculpture, the Italian activist and artist Cristina Donati Meyer, said that the installation is dedicated to the problem of combating drug trafficking and drug use.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments, contact us via email.